This is the Angel Connect podcast, episode number 12, an interview with Jared Slosberg, successful entrepreneur and angel investing criteria. In this episode, Hall Martin interviews Jared Slosberg. Jared, who has been a successful entrepreneur and has a ton of credentials behind his name, actually tells us what criteria he uses for deals. Besides market size and besides looking forward and besides understanding the entrepreneur and his talents and the product and possibilities, he also delivers ideas about competition. How does he evaluate competition in creating his deals? As you'll hear in this episode, he does give examples of attractive deals in which he's invested. So let's listen to this interview conducted by Hall Martin as he looks inside successful angel investorship by Jared Slosberg. Let's listen in.
Hello, this is Hall Martin. I'm with the Angel Connect podcast series here with Jared Slosberg. Jared, thank you for joining us today. We like to interview people to talk about what they invest in as angel investors. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you are looking to do as an angel investor?
Sure. So I was previously an entrepreneur. I started a company called Profit Fuel a little over a decade ago. We did marketing for small businesses. And a few years ago, we got acquired by Yodel, who does the same thing, essentially. About a year and a half ago, I left Yodel, and I've just been investing and spending time with my kids and enjoying the free time. As far as things that I'm investing in, it's mostly technology companies of some kind or another. And, I think it's my way of making sure that I'm still somewhat involved, using my brain, feeling like I'm still contributing to the world in some way.
So when a deal comes to you, what are your first 2 or 3 criteria you look at to decide if you're going to go forward with it and learn more, or you're immediately out of it? What's your initial screen?
The first thing I look at is size of market. What I found is valuations tend to be centered very much around kind of the stage where the company is. Like, is it 2 guys who just had this idea? Do they have a few customers, etc.? But not really as much centered around size of market as I think it should be. And so oftentimes things that have really big sizes of market, I think, are better values. And so what I'll try to do is I'll say, hey, okay, let me try to think forward 5 years from now. And let's just assume that everything goes right with this company. Like they get a lot of customers, their product's well received, they don't mess anything up. And 5 years from now, they're really successful. What does that look like? Is that a company with, $10 million of revenue? Is that a company with $100 million worth of revenue? What kind of valuation would they get? And try to kind of fast forward 5 years and really spend some time thinking about what does this company look like kind of at its, size that it will be eventually. And I'm trying to look for companies that are as big as possible. Oftentimes you see companies that are exploiting a really narrow niche, and they're doing pretty well, but that niche is pretty small, and it's not clear what would happen afterwards, and there's not much of a discount on their valuation kind of as a result of their niche being really small. So that's the first thing I look at. Okay. The other thing I look at is oftentimes it'll be a company, sometimes there'll be companies where I really feel like I understand a lot about what's going on. And sometimes there'll be companies where, I'm not quite as sure. And then I kind of look to the market for validation. Like, what kind of traction are they getting? If they've been around for a couple years and they quite haven't gotten anything done yet, then you kind of have to start to wonder. But on the other hand, if they started 3 months ago and all this, they've got a few customers and they've got a pipeline of other customers who are interested and they're signing them up on a monthly basis or even a weekly basis, then, I kind of decide that the market's judgment is better than mine. And I decide, the market's clearly accepting. I don't really understand exactly why, maybe, or I had some doubts about whether this would be a good product, but clearly, the market is speaking, and so I'm very interested if they have a lot of traction. There's a couple other things I look at. Sometimes there's just a company that just grabs you. Like, you hear the idea and you're like, oh my God, like, this really can change the world. And I totally buy into it and I understand the space and, like, this is phenomenal. And so at some of those, just everything else goes out the window. Like you're just grabbed by the idea, and as long as everything else isn't horrible, you're just like, I just got to be along for the ride because I just think this is phenomenal. So that's another thing that happens. And then the entrepreneur. Spend some time trying to get to know them a little bit and understand what I think about them. Sometimes it's people who are really senior. One company I invested in, it was a guy who basically had been an entrepreneur for years, retired, hadn't planned to go back to work, saw this idea, got so passionate about it that he decided to come out of retirement to go run the company. And I was like, wow, I've got a really senior person, clearly jazzed about the idea, that kind of validates the idea as well as him. And so I invested largely for that reason. Sometimes it'll be a really young guy. I've got a company, and I think the founder's 22 or 23. But every time I talk to him, I feel like I'm having a conversation with a really seasoned executive. Like if I just played the recordings of our conversations and I told you he was 45, you'd be like, oh, okay. Yeah. Like he's really young and really solid. And I'm excited to invest in this company, but I'm also kind of excited to invest in him. Like I don't think this will be the first company that he starts. And I want to be kind of investing in him for the long term as well.
Well, big markets bring a lot of competition. What's your take on competition? Some angels don't like competition because they think that's going to hurt, but some do because that proves market's there. What's your take on it?
I think competition is one of the hardest things to evaluate. So one thing I like is companies that have progressed far enough without competition that their technology is really superior to everything else out there, and it gives them some runway to get things done. Other times there'll be spaces where like the idea is phenomenal, it's become obvious because of other things that have happened, and like 10 people are tackling it at once, and there's not much technology involved. So real estate marketplaces, right? So, you had this whole, peer-to-peer kind of real estate marketplaces. So you had this whole peer-to-peer lending space. Everyone said, oh, well, we could do this for other spaces, real estate being an obvious one. And there's like 20 companies doing this. Thinking the idea is phenomenal, but like trying to dig through and really understand which of these 20 is going to be successful is very difficult. The other thing that I'll say is, sometimes a company will come in and you go, this is a great idea, but the thing that's the most unknown and the hardest to get your hands around is who else is doing something similar and where are they, right? Like you can decide, this is a great idea, I love the technology, I love the team, but trying to understand where they fit into the competitive landscape is often the most difficult. And so if something, I'm not scared of competition per se, but there's a lot of extra effort involved because you really, I think, have to understand it. And I think it oftentimes the hardest thing to understand.
Well, how do you analyze the competition? If they're on the market, that's easy. If they're in stealth mode or coming up as pipeline competition, how do you assess competition and decide what role they're going to play in the future?
It's really tough. And for me, a lot of it ends up being really doubling down on some of the other things I look at, like assuming there's going to be a bunch of competition. Do I like the philosophy that this company has as to how they're going to approach the market? Is that different from other companies? So sometimes it's kind of slight or sometimes significant philosophical differences on how to approach it, and I decide which one I think is better and does this company have it. Sometimes it's team, like I think this company really can out-execute other people. And it's really sometimes because you can't really know, and you obviously have this bias from the people that you've met. You're like, well, these guys are great. It's hard to know how great the people you haven't met are. You end up doubling down on some of the other things as well. Also, I don't think most of these markets are winner-take-all kinds of things. Certainly there are some network kinds of companies, that have network effects where you really think, okay, there's only going to be one. But oftentimes even in those, number 2, 3, and 4 get acquired in some way. So I'm not worried really, hey, there's a company I've invested now and it's got a competitor that just got funded by Y Combinator, and they're more or less both at the same phase. They're both pretty early on. I think the idea is great. I'm not particularly worried. I think both of them could be successful very easily. The parts I really get most nervous about are when, the idea has become obvious to a lot of other people, and it's not one or two competitors, it's 10 or 20 competitors. And at that point, you really realize, some of them, the top 3 or 4 may all be successful, but that's not going to be the majority. And so, but most of the cases I found are, there's 2 or 3 other people doing something similar, and I don't get overly hung up by it.
Okay. So there's lots of deals you see, and some you pursue and some you don't. Let's talk about one you saw, you pursued, and why did you go after that deal? Can you, if you mention the name, that's fine. If not, be interested to see what deal you've recently invested in or did in the not too distant past, and why did you put money into it? What did you see that really attracted you to it?
One of the companies I've invested is a company here in Austin called KLD Energy Technologies. They started out making motors for electric vehicles, and they are now working on making electric vehicles themselves.
Oh, cool.
The reason I invested in them is kind of a combination of the things that I've talked about so far. One of them is big market. They have technology that makes their electric vehicles about twice as efficient as anything out there. Twice as efficient as a Nissan Leaf, for example. A little bit more than that for a Tesla. Tesla's more a performance than efficient car. And as I kind of look forward, right now the battle between electric vehicles is really a battle between electric and non-electric, right? The electric vehicles have this tiny, tiny market share, and they're grabbing market share from combustion engines. And in that environment, efficiency isn't really that critical, right? It's 10 times more efficient than a gas engine. Who cares whether it's 10 or 20 times more efficient? But as you kind of look forward 5 or 10 years and you think electric vehicles are going to be competing against each other, then efficiency becomes really, really important, dramatically more important than it is for combustion engines, right? Because twice as efficient means twice as much range, which is one of the biggest things people have about electric vehicles, or half the batteries, which is a huge amount of the cost and a huge amount of the weight. So when I look forward, look at the market size, if this technology really is better and cars could be twice as efficient, then it could legitimately have a majority of the electric market, either making the cars themselves or more likely selling motor systems to them. Mm-hmm. And that's a market size of billions and billions and potentially hundreds of billions of dollars. So from that perspective, of all the companies I've met, it's the one that has kind of the biggest potential market if everything goes right. They've got traction, they've got customers, they're selling motors every day. I like the people, and the idea really just grabbed me from the get-go. That, you look at something like an electric motor and you think, oh, well, electric motors have been here for 100 years. We understand everything there is to know about electric motors. And, the interesting thing is when you go talk to, other people who are in competitive businesses, they also think, oh, electric motors, there's no work to be done there. We understand electric motors. We've understood them for years. And it turns out, no, we don't. There's other things we could know that we had never imagined. And it's taken, 10 years, I think, for this technology to kind of develop. But it's twice as efficient. And that makes a really big difference.
So electric motors, the theory or the practice has been in place for a long time, but there's a next level of innovation. It's in efficiency. It's in the efficiency area. But what exactly is the breakthrough that drives that efficiency?
So, what happens is people say, hey, electric motors, well, they're 97% efficient, and so they're great. We don't need to do anything. But when you look at, let's say, a Tesla, you have the battery, and then they take that battery and they can't just plug in a traditional electric motor to it. So what they do is they have an inverter and they convert that DC electric power to AC at high voltage. And then they operate this induction motor at really high speeds because otherwise they can't get enough torque. And then they have a reduction gear that reduces the speed by a factor of 10, which also increases the torque by a factor of 10. And then they have this motor, and then it goes to the wheels through a differential. And so, like, there's all these pieces. And so it's not the motor really itself that's inefficient. So when you say, hey, I've got this motor system that's, twice as efficient, they go, well, no, motor is 97% efficient. Well, it is, in the same way that you have a car, like you have gears because it's only efficient in a certain range of RPM. The same thing is kind of true of an electric motor. Right, it's just a wider band, and so when you compare it to a combustion engine, you go, "Oh, what's great? We don't need anything." But if you look at all the other things, I think a Tesla car has 18 moving parts in their drivetrain, right? And all those moving parts are, one, have potential for wear and tear and increased less reliability, and also they suck some of the efficiency out. The KLD system has 2 moving parts in their electric drivetrain, right? It's basically they just put the motor in the wheel, right? Like the wheel is the outside of the motor. Like there's nothing, it's completely direct drive.
Oh.
And so, the problem I'm getting there, like, hey, everyone would kind of say, hey, the direct drive motor is certainly better. Like my washing machine, big letters says, direct drive, isn't it great? We've been able to have this innovation. The challenge is you really need a high torque motor to do that, right? Like you've got to get a motor that can generate enough torque to move a car. And most people haven't been able to do that. You can't do that with a conventional motor. You run it at 10 times the speed and then run it through reduction gear. In order to do that, what KLD has done is they use a completely new material to make the motor out of, right? So most motors have been made out of some sort of iron. And you can switch the polarity in a motor that's based on iron about 100 times a second, 100 hertz. And the material that KLD is using, you can do it at 1500 hertz.
Oh, wow.
And so that 15x improvement ends up translating to more or less a 15x improvement in torque. And so then they can just connect the motor directly to the wheels.
So the efficiency is less about the electric motor itself, but how you apply the electric motor to the car application, putting it in the wheel, new materials, better torque generation out of it. And so that's where there's a different level of efficiency, I guess, in that case.
Yes, and so it's really the whole motor system. And even to this day, people tend to buy the motor from one place, buy the motor controller somewhere else, and get the batteries from the third provider. And one of the other things that KLD has found is there's a lot of work to be done that you can squeeze a lot of efficiency by integrating those pieces better.
I see.
And so, for example, I think it's the battery to the motor controller. Most people will have a single wire connecting them, and they have like a ribbon cable. Right? Like there's a lot of stuff that connecting these pieces with rich data can really improve the efficiency.
Okay. Well, that's an example of a company you invested in. What's an example of a company you passed on, and why did you pass?
So I'm not going to name them because
Sure.
for obvious reasons. But there was a company that I really spent some time with, really liked the idea, thought the technology was good, thought the market size was good, and the CEO just didn't strike me as someone who was going to be able to execute. And the reason is, typically what I like to see in a CEO is attention to what really needs to get done. Like, I want to see stuff get done. And so, the conversations are about, hey, you see that peak way up there? That's where I want to get to. And before I get there, I need to get, you see that point about halfway up? That's where we're going to get to. And let me tell you how we're going to get there. And here's all the things we're going to do to kind of, as we build up to get to that point, we get there. And once we get to that point, then we can tackle this big problem that we really want to do. And the conversation I had with this CEO was more like, you see that peak? That's where we want to get to. But let me tell you about all these other peaks that are behind there. And it was very much focused on like all the other applications that this technology could have. And I just didn't feel like we were going to get, he was too distracted by all these other things that he wanted to do and all the short-term stuff that needed to get done. Like, I just didn't feel like he was the right guy to make that happen. For me, the hardest thing in a startup is you are completely under-resourced compared to all the competition, compared to the incumbents, compared to everything. And really being able to focus in very narrowly on, here's what I need to do, I'm not going to be distracted, this is what's the most critical, and focus on that and get it done is really critical. And, if I meet someone and I don't feel like they have that ability, then, a lot of other stuff can be right, and I'm just worried. And, they could end up doing really well. And if they do well, my guess is someone else had been brought in, maybe the CEO is still there, but someone else had been brought in and trying to bring that discipline to the company.
So was it purely just for focus or lack of focus, or were there other issues?
I think that, that was the primary issue, and that alone was really what everything else wasn't perfect. In any of these companies, nothing is perfect, but that really was the linchpin that I decided not to invest this on.
Well, I like the peak analogy because there's many things you focus on going up that one mountain, but if they're focused on other mountains, then that can be very distracting as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for taking time to talk with us today and share your experience. And good luck with your angel investing, and let us know what we can do to help in the near future.
Thanks for having me.